about how you can talk to your renter about soil conservation. And before I do that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Cannon River Watershed Joint Powers Organization. This organization formed kind of around 2016, and it was a change in the way that counties managed their soil and local water quality. So it used to be that counties would only manage at the county level. And the state of Minnesota decided that counties and soil and water conservation districts should take more of a watershed approach because water doesn't stop at the county line. So counties and SWCDs came together on the sub-watershed level. So the Cannon River watershed follows all the drainage area that flows into the Cannon River. So we have 6 counties, 6 soil and water conservation districts. You can see here on the map, the red is our watershed boundary. And then there are also 2 small watershed districts that have also been involved, as well as numerous cities and private organizations. They all came together over the course of 3 years, starting in 2016, and they came together to develop a plan to address all the conservation needs of the Cannon River watershed. In 2020, the organization developed a joint powers board to oversee it, and that is represented by county commissioners and soil and water district supervisors that make decisions about how money should be spent and where projects should happen. So, and there's also a lot of staff. There's county staff, there's SWCD staff, and they're all working to improve local water quality. So some of the projects that we're doing include, I need to go to the next slide, include working with farmers to do cover crops and structural practices to reduce erosion, working with lakeshore homeowners to do natural shorelines and to fix septic systems that might be leaking into lakes, working with cities to improve stormwater infrastructure and doing well sealings, and of course doing education and outreach. And that's one of the reasons why we're having this webinar today. And so the graphic above here just talks about some of the facts about the watershed. Almost 1 million acres, half of those acres are agricultural, 800 linear miles of shoreline with lakes and river banks, stream banks, that kind of thing. And then it shows just a breakdown of how much of the watershed is in each of those 6 counties. So there's a lot going on in the watershed, lots of projects. And we would like to see more landowners and producers do conservation projects on their land, and that's why we're here today. So I will hand it over to Claire, and she's gonna teach you about some of the principles of soil health.
All right, thanks. Yeah, Teresa and I are gonna go back and forth a little bit. So I'll get set here. And are you seeing what you're supposed to see, Teresa? Oh. Do you see my screen, my PowerPoint?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, thanks. So, yep, just going to go into a little bit of the basics of soil health and conservation and kind of the principles of promoting soil health on your land. And most of the slides that I'm presenting today are from my colleague, Dr. Anna Cates at the University of Minnesota. She works with Extension and with the Minnesota Office for Soil Health. So just if you want more information, here's some of her information here. And a lot of the slides and research are from her and her lab. So first, soil health. What are we really talking about when we talk about soil health? There's a lot of definitions and people kind of have different opinions about what this is too, but I like this Natural Resource Conservation Service definition that is soil health is the continued capacity of the soil to function as a vital living ecosystem. And so I really like the word function here, and maybe in the chat you can throw in some thoughts of what are some of the functions we care about in agricultural land? What are some of the functions we want our soil to have? I'll let there be at least a couple answers in the chat. I'll wait you out. Infiltrate rainfall. Yes, have water infiltration. When we get a rain, we want the water to go in our soil and not run off or kind of erode and go right off the soil surface. Let's see if I can get one more here. Yeah, organic matter. Yep, so organic matter, we want our soil to function and have the ability to hold water. So water holding capacity, or the soil's ability to hold on some moisture after a rain event, so the crop can then later use that water. And that water holding capacity is impacted by the amount of organic matter in the soil. Yep, and another one that I think about is nutrient cycling. We want our soils to be able to function well as far as nutrients being available to our crops. And so the microbes that live in our soil help make some of those nutrients available. Our plants need most of their nutrients in an inorganic form, and that nutrient cycling is how, part of the process to getting it in that form. And you can kind of think about your soil sort of like a bank account, or maybe like a piggy bank. You need to deposit nutrients, of course, but also things like organic material, like compost, manure, crop residue, fertilizer, cover crops, the roots from cover crops. Make those deposits to be able to make withdrawals from your soil, and withdrawals in the form of healthy plants and crops we want to harvest. So if you have enough nutrients in the soil and enough of that organic material that can turn into organic matter, you have to have enough of those things to be able to, grow healthy crops. But I like the piggy bank analogy because it can help you visualize too that if you deposit too much or over apply your nutrients, for example, there can be some overflow or waste as well. And this is a graphic that we like to use an extension to just kind of help you assess if your soil is healthy. Teresa will talk about some more signs you can look at on your property to help you assess if you have some maybe resource issues or if your soil isn't quite where you want it to be. But this is kind of a good rule of thumb. It's just a little simple key here. Does your soil blow or flow away? Do you have erosion? If you do, it's probably not healthy. That's something we really don't want on our agricultural fields. Does water soak in quickly? Does it drain? Does it crust? Does your crop recover most of the nutrients you apply? Again, are you kind of getting your money's worth when you make a deposit and you make a withdrawal? And are there areas where plants die or grow poorly? So you can kind of assess your own property with this, or think about whether your soil maybe falls into the probably healthy or probably not healthy category. And we have some principles that are kind of widely accepted as the soil health principles, the things that help make a soil healthy or help promote that soil health. And those are: keep the soil covered, minimize disturbance, increase crop diversity, keep living roots in the ground, and integrate livestock. And I'll ask you to use your chat again. What are some of the practices that follow these principles? So keep the soil covered. What's a practice that does that? Minimize disturbance. What's a practice that does that? Yep, cover crops or perennial crops achieve the keep the soil covered, keep living roots in the ground, and also probably increase crop diversity if you're adding something new or different into your rotation. Thanks. We'll wait for one more. No-till or strip-till. Yep, so reduced tillage is a practice that definitely fits into the principle of minimizing disturbance. Thanks for chatting along with me. So, yep, keeping the soil covered, things like cover crops, leaving crop residue out on the field, minimizing disturbance can be reduced tillage, and that can be reduced frequency or intensity. So yes, things like no-till and strip-till, but also just like more shallow tillage or vertical tillage. Keep living roots in the ground are things that kind of Bailey mentioned it in the chat, is having cover crops or perennial crops, which are out there longer, maybe adding to your crop rotation, doing some alfalfa, which is a perennial, integrate livestock. Oh, and that kind of, fits into the increasing plant diversity too. And then integrating livestock could be things like grazing on croplands, even applying manure, right? Even if you don't have the animals on your field, getting their waste product onto your field can be a way to integrate livestock into your cropping operation. And you can minimize disturbance by reducing tillage. I'm just going to go into some of the work we have in extension and from Anna Cates here. So first want to say that a farmer may be tilling for several reasons. Tilling can help manage crop residue, incorporate amendments and fertilizers, help prepare the seed bed, help control weeds and remove surface compaction and rutting. But some of the negative side effects of tillage can include that crusting of the soil. So again, not letting water infiltrate, soil erosion, because we're breaking up some of our soil structure into smaller pieces and making it more easy to erode. We can lose soil organic matter with tillage and just kind of overall create some poor soil structure. And so I want to show a table here that shows different tillage methods. And then the first column is the relative cost, so a ranking of which of these methods is most and least expensive. And then the second column is more what I want to look at here, and that's the relative soil impact. So how much impact this particular tillage method is having on the soil and kind of roughing up that soil structure. So you can see here moldboard plow is like our most intense tillage, and tillage is on a spectrum. Some tillage can be very aggressive, some can be lighter, especially, if you play with the frequency and intensity, you can get kind of lower on the tillage spectrum without being fully no-till. So moldboard plow is up there. Then we have zone tilling, chisel plowing, disc harrowing, and then after that, kind of disc ripping, field cultivating, and tandem disking are at 6s. Getting lower here, we have ridge till, then strip till, and no till is going to have the lowest relative soil impact, of course. And just taking a look at some of those implements here and giving ideas for reducing tillage without just being strip till or no till. So discs, which are a common form of tillage in our area, are very aggressive. They are destructive of the soil structure, and they kind of shear and press the soil as they go too. One thing you can do is select points and shanks that are less aggressive. So the purpose of points and shanks is to lift and separate the soil and causes less destruction of soil structure. But you can even be choosier on that by picking something that's, you know, shallower and going to be less destructive. So overall, when you're thinking about managing your tillage, some things to keep in mind is reduce the number of times you're out in the field tilling. So do you, is it essential? Do you need to be out there in the spring and the fall? So that's a way to reduce frequency. Maybe be less aggressive. Limit discs and limit your moldboard plowing. Make your implement setting shallower, so you're not getting as deep with roughing up that soil structure, and choose shanks that are going to be less aggressive. You can also rotate your tillage to match the field conditions. So considering weather, considering the soil type of your different fields is something, drying up faster. There's a lot of things you can really tailor and hone in on when you're thinking of it from a field to field basis too. So back to those soil health practices, principles. I just want to go into how keeping the soil covered and adding diversity, minimizing disturbance, and keeping those living roots in the ground, not really touching on integrating livestock, but how those soil health principles affect our soils and affects the biology living in the soil as well as the physical effects. Okay. So how those soil health principles of boost soil biology is microbes thrive on roots. And so first, the roots contribute to our first goal. They protect the habitat of those little critters and microbes living in the soil. And you see, the soil on the roots in this picture here. It's glued together by compounds that the roots and the microbes slough off, and then it's tied together with the root hairs themselves. And nutrient cycling, including transformations of organic matter and mineralization of nitrogen and phosphorus, is a completely different ball game next to the roots here. And this graphic is showing how on roots there's a different community of microbes, right, on the roots versus not. And they cycle on and off of mineral surfaces there. And that's a good thing. That dynamic is releasing nutrients and supporting plant growth. And as far as physical characteristics, we can talk about soil structure. And soil aggregates are important to soil structure because soil needs space for air and water. And soil aggregates have two levels of organization. Kind of basically, there are sticky glues that hold aggregates together at a smaller scale. And then roots help bind those aggregates to one another at a larger scale. And so roots both boost microbes and those glue-like properties, as well as holding aggregates together at the larger scale. So all roots do this. The important thing about cover crops is that they give you more roots, but the roots of your cash crops do this too. But the cover crops give you more roots and at different times of the year, keeping soil intact during the winter and spring, instead of, tilled and vulnerable to erosion. To help you understand the structure of soil in a soil aggregate, I want to show you this image, which is made of many X-ray scans, and the blue is pores, the tan is organic matter, and the gray is minerals. And pores is where the water can get in, and your soil aggregate can then hold water. And we'll look at an example of a slake test later on here to show you kind of the importance of a soil's ability to hold water in its pores. So I'll let that play out there for you. All right. Oops. And that soil structure is important because water needs to enter and be able to move through and exit the soil. And, you probably need no reminder that There's a lot of things our soil is doing. It looks like the group here is pretty well aware of soil functions and soil health. But in order for water to flow into the soil as shown here, you need to have big macropores in between particles. And what's shown on the left is a soil with no structure, really. It's just the tiny silt and clay particles that are too close together to let water enter. And when water hits the surface, it sits there until there's enough of it to flow with gravity. So it creates the crust that, you know, on the field that I'm sure you're familiar with. And there's a vicious cycle here. Soil which doesn't let water in crusts, which makes it harder for water to get into. Oops. And so zooming in on that, I want to point out that inside these aggregates are actually more tiny pores where water can be stored. And that's my colleague Anna's little cartoon there with the extra blue polka dots. And the tiny pores inside the aggregates act as long-term water storage, but don't get in the way of water infiltration through large pores down the profile. So we need both those small pores and large pores, and soil health soil that is healthy and has good structure has lots of aggregates, which gives you both those small and larger pores. And here's a real X-ray of soil in South Dakota that illustrates that property. So notice the treatments. We have conventional tillage on the left, no till for 29 years, and then no till for 4 years from left to right. And see how over time there's more of those high volume pores. So more of those red pores. And then just to walk you through this a little bit, the green side is those smaller pores. And so tillage does aerate the soil and give you oxygen, but it doesn't give you big connected pores. So you can see over time, or, in this 29-year cycle, we see lots of those large, high volume pores at the soil surface and deeper down in the soil too, really. And that connectivity, that the connectedness of those pores, those high volume pores, is important because it determines how far the water that enters the soil is able to travel. And in conventional tillage, the pores are, present to some degree, but the water can't travel because it's not those highly connected, high volume pores. And this is just a really cool slide that I'm glad Anna shared with me. Anna was trying to see if we could measure aggregate stability here, and they used this Cornell device to rain, faux rain on a soil with and without a rye cover crop growing in it. And the heavily tilled soil in the middle, really dissolved into mush. It doesn't look like there's any oxygen left in there. It looks like pudding kind of. And on the right, you can see that the aggregates essentially remained intact and they got the same amount of water, but this aggregate on the right didn't dissolve, kind of turn into mush. It didn't dissolve into smaller particles. And that dissolving isn't ideal because it takes time for structure to build back up again. And so if you have it just kind of falling apart in the water and dissolving, that takes time to rebuild those aggregates. In the meantime, you don't get water, infiltration in this kind of soil, and you can't drive on it either because that's too soupy to drive on. So kind of the expectation that Anna has said is that after rain, you get less big aggregates in the soil like that. And roots help build those big pores for water flow. This is just an image demonstrating that, helping make some really large, vertical pores. And to continue to demonstrate the importance of aggregate stability and water infiltration, I'm going to play a video here. Looking at the audience, though, I think all of you have probably seen aggregate stability test, a slake test, and water infiltration. So Teresa, I'll leave it up to you if you would like us to play it.
Well, looking at the time, we're at 12:30, so maybe we can link it in the chat and include it along with the email that will come out in the next few days, and then people can watch it there.
Sounds great.
Okay. So I will, can you get it back to my screen?
Well, you'll have to share now.
Okay.
Yep.
There we go. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So I'm having trouble getting it to go forward here. There we go. So it was great hearing about soil health from Claire. Those are all really good points that landowners should know, because your soil is your investment. Your land is your investment, and the less erosion that's out there, the higher the organic matter, the more infiltration it is. When the soil's healthy, that's going to affect your land rent. So it's in your best interest to see conservation on your land. So what I'd like to do now is quickly go through some of the common types of erosion that we have here in Rice County. And you can get an idea for on your own land if you see these things. It's time for hopefully a change in practice, and these things are fixable. So in this picture right here, we have some wind erosion. The picture on the left was taken in 2022 in February. And you can see in the bottom part of the picture, we have this black soil. And this is right at the edge of the roadside ditch. So come spring, if we have heavy rains, that soil is going to get washed away in the road ditch. And we really want to prevent that, obviously, because if it ends up in the road ditch, it could end up in a stream or a lake and pollute the water. So for a situation like this field right here, there was fall tillage done, and the way to help prevent wind erosion during the winter would be to skip the fall tillage. In the picture on the right, you can see that there are the old corn stalks from the fall were left. There was no tillage done. And then there's also the cover crops that are growing. So the soil is covered. Like those principles that Claire mentioned, there's a living root, the soil is armored, and it's protected from the wind erosion. So if we look at our next slide, another type of common soil erosion across the Cannon River watershed is sheet erosion. And sheet erosion occurs kind of on flat land, which you can see here in the picture on the left. You can tell that water kind of just pooled in on that flat area there, and it flowed away and it left the soil disturbed, and it took that soil away. And so to fix that, again, the common and easy fix to prevent that type of erosion would be conservation tillage and cover crops. So on the right hand picture, we have, again, there was no fall tillage done or in the spring, and this field is ready to get, the farmer could no-till plant his soybeans into this field. So we see the cover crops growing, and we see the residue left behind by the corn stalks, which helps to mulch over the soil. We don't have any bare ground, and that helps to prevent the erosion. Our next type of erosion that we see commonly across the watershed is rill erosion. So if you look on this hillside in between where the rows are planted, we have erosion kind of occurring in between the rows, usually like a couple inches, 2-3 inches wide. And again, this type of erosion potentially could be fixed by parking the plow and not doing any tillage, especially in the fall. So if we leave that residue behind, we plant cover crops, we're arming the soil, we're mulching the soil. When it rains out and the rain hits the ground, it's hitting the corn stalks, it's hitting the cover crops instead of moving the bare soil. So again, we can prevent this type of erosion by implementing conservation practices. So our next slide. Final type of erosion that we commonly see across the Cannon River watershed is gully erosion. And gully erosion occurs when water flows down, kind of flows down hillsides and it meets in the low spot. And it's almost like a temporary stream that ends up flowing during a really heavy rain. And that concentrated flow of water can carve out the soil if there is no protection on the soil, if the soil is bare. So you can see in this picture at the top left, we have a gully that's forming in this cornfield. There is bare soil below, so that's with the exception of the corn plants growing. And there's a couple different ways this type of erosion can be fixed. Sometimes, and it kind of depends on the characteristics of the land, which practice will work the best. In some instances, landowners will put in a grassed waterway, which is the picture in number 1. So vegetation is planted and that low swale is shaped. And when we have heavy rains, the water will flow onto that grass and flow over the grass, and it will prevent soil erosion because the grass is anchored to the soil. In number 2, again, we have cover crops and conservation tillage, which in some cases, that might be enough to prevent gully erosion depending on the characteristics and slopes of the farmland. And the third fix is something called a water and sediment control basin. And basically what happens in this situation is you have earthen dam that is built in between 2 small hillsides, and that holds the water back during heavy rains. Then there's usually there's an intake pipe that is in the middle of it. You can't really see it in this picture, but as the water is backed up, though, it will enter that tile intake pipe, and then there's tile underground that will safely carry the water away. So instead of the water flowing down through the swale, it gets carried underground. So those 3 conservation practices can help fix soil erosion. So Claire went over a lot of the benefits of cover crops and conservation tillage and their effect on soil health. There's a lot of them, from reducing compaction, improved infiltration, erosion control, weed suppression, a lot of great benefits. But we know that sometimes it's hard for landowners to implement conservation practices. It might seem like, why don't landowners do this? A lot of people who don't farm will ask, I've heard this question before, why don't they do it? It's not that simple. It's a pretty complicated process, actually, and there are barriers. And so these are things to keep in mind as you are talking to your renter about soil conservation. You need to keep in mind the risks and the barriers that might be in place. So for example, the big one is cost. So for cover crops on an 80-acre field, it rolls around $55 to $60 an acre for the cost of the seed, the termination. So that's around $4,400 over an 80-acre field. If we go and we look at putting in some of those conservation practices that I just showed you, the sediment basin, the waterway, that can cost $4,000 per sediment basin. And sometimes fields, an 80-acre field at times, you'll have numerous ones. They might have a system of 6 to 8 basins in an 80-acre field. So that cost really adds up. We look at a strip till machine, which is a type of conservation tillage that is used to put more residue on the ground. That strip till machine can cost $150,000 to $230,000 for a used machine. That is a huge investment for farmers to make. A cover crop interseeder, at the very least, you know, that's a $15,000 investment. And so when you think about all these costs, that can be a real barrier and a real risk to farmers, because using cover crops also takes a complete change in management. If a farmer's switching from conventional tillage to this type of system using cover crops and conservation tillage, there's a lot more variables. And for example, the metaphor that I've heard before that makes a lot of sense is that it's like switching, it's like conventional farming is like playing checkers, and farming with cover crops and conservation tillage is like playing chess, because there's the weather, and there's the how to seed, and there's how to terminate, and there's all these extra questions that have to be addressed. And it can also, if you make a mistake, it can cost you yield. And so it's really a learning process. And when we work with farmers, we have them experiment and start out with a small area, because it's a learning process to make the change. And one of the reasons it's such a complicated and the cost is a barrier, there are all kinds of conservation programs out there that farmers can utilize to implement these practices. And so that's where SWCDs come in. And we can work with you, the landowner, and we can work with your renter, the producers, in securing funds that will help the process of experimenting and changing to different farming practices possible. So a lot of our SWC has a custom interseeding program. A lot of districts have no-till drills that can plant cover crops and other interseeders that they rent out. So that's something that landowners and farmers can take, they can utilize. Most districts in the watershed and across Minnesota have cover crop incentive programs that provides cost share towards the cost of planting cover crops. So it'll help pay for the seed and help pay for the planting of the different species of cover crops. And then a little bit about other cost share programs. There right now is a ton of programs out there, and I'm not going to go into all these because it's hard for even us staff people to keep track of them all. A lot of them, it depends on where you live. So if you're in a certain geographic area, you qualify for some programs. Some of those programs pay higher rates. So there's local programs at the county level, which include SWCDs, like I mentioned. The Cannon River Watershed Joint Powers Organization also has money, local money, to do cover crops, conservation, tillage, and structural practices. There's state programs like the Ag Water Quality Certification Program, state cost share, the Best Management Practices Low Interest Loan Program that provides low interest loans to help buy equipment, but it's very competitive. There's federal programs. I'm not going to go into those because there's so many. And then nonprofit and private conservation programs. We could talk for hours on all the different programs that are out there, but I think the take-home message I'd like to leave landowners and or producers is that SWCD offices are there to serve you guys, and we're there to help you find the best conservation program that will fit the needs of your farm. So we are totally open for you. All you have to do is call our office, and we would be willing to discuss these programs with you. We can come out to your land and walk the land with you by yourself, or if you want your renter to come with, we could all meet and walk your property and figure out what type of conservation needs. If you have erosion or anything, we can kick around ideas on how to fix those problems. Hopefully we can help improve your soil health and protect your land investment. So I'm gonna hand it back over to Claire, and she's gonna tell us a little bit about rental agreements and furthermore, how to talk to your renter.
All right, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Teresa. Teresa and I chatted before this a little bit about some ideas for talking to renters about conservation and soil health practices. And we think a good place to start is knowing the average rental rate for your county. So you can find that out from your local extension office. There's an extension office in every county. Some counties have specifically an agriculture related educator as well. So you can give your local office a call and get your average rental rate. One thing I like to remind people is it is an average. So there's other ways to hone in and kind of fine tune what the rental rate for your land should be. And that would involve a little bit more working one-on-one with someone at extension about your crop productivity index and some factors that can help you determine maybe where you land in the range of rental rates. But having somewhere to start that knowledge of what the average rental rate for your county is pretty helpful. And I'll show you a tool from Extension that can help you find those rental rates historically and kind of projected for the next year as well. But that helps you know that you're kind of in the range. And then we think it really makes sense to start maybe the conversation by asking renters what they're willing to do or maybe willing to try. And I think it just, is a better way to open that conversation by insisting that somebody does a specific practice, is ask them what they have the capability to do, what they're willing to do. Maybe it's not going all, no-till or strip-till, which requires different equipment, but maybe it's reducing the frequency of their tillage. Maybe it's trying a cover crop. So just thinking that that's a little, more strategic to ask what they are willing to do with the equipment they have, with the capabilities and time that they have. And then I think it's important to be willing to negotiate. So as a landowner, are you willing to reduce rent to help cover the cost of some of these practices? Maybe help cover the cost not only of possibly some of that equipment, but also for the potential that there might be a little bit of reduced yield for that farmer while they're trying to figure out the practices, right? Just there's potential there that they might take a little bit of a hit. And are you maybe willing to help pay for cover crop seed, which is an additional cost? And then of course there's those resources, those great programs through Soil and Water Conservation District and Natural Resource Conservation Service, also MDA, all those other grants that Teresa mentioned. And we think it's a great idea to get a consultation from Soil and Water Conservation District. I think there's no real downside to having a renter, the landowner, and kind of a mediator, someone from Soil and Water Conservation District that can point out some of the needs of the land, and everyone hearing the same thing and addressing the problems together seems like a good idea. So I'm just going to show you here our Extension farmland rent webpage. And this is a page that not only can you find the historical land rent, so you can see a map if you like that kind of visual. I tend to go to the cropland rental rates spreadsheet. You can click on a county or see the spreadsheet. You can find your county on this big spreadsheet, and you can find the average going back to 2013, as well as an estimate. They don't have the 24 estimate up yet, but you can see the rental rate for 2023, which can still be a good baseline for helping you decide what to charge this next year. Another thing that I go to on here a lot is looking at, back one page, is looking at these lease types and templates, so you can see some ideas for that, as well as budget sheets. So I'm a landowner, what should I charge for land rent? And you can actually fill out with your real numbers, what, kind of a guideline for what your desired rent is. And this is then not just taking into account the average in your county, but what is going to pay off for you as a landowner too. And then there's something similar for an operator, for the renter, so they can fill out their cost of production and expenses per acre and figure out what's going to kind of break even or make the money as far as what they can afford for a land rent price. So that's really my thoughts there. Do you have anything to add, Teresa?
No, I think that was a good synopsis of some of the resources, a great starting point.
Good. And since we have a couple minutes, I would love to I didn't know she was going to be on this call today, but I'd like to introduce my colleague who's new with Extension. Bailey Tangen is an educator, an Extension educator focusing specifically on soil health and water quality. So just seeing some of the other people who are on too might be a good introduction and a good place for, saying hi to Bailey. If you want to raise your hand, Bailey, I can have you show your video. Otherwise, okay, there we go. Oh, I thought I could. Well, maybe put your contact information in the chat, Bailey, and people can connect with you later too. And then I don't know, Teresa, if you want to take any time for questions.
Yeah, we could open up to questions. Also, there's one other thing I'd like to promote. We're having a woman in agriculture meeting on March 16th here in Faribault. We're partnering with Upper Mississippi Isaac Walton League. And that will be at the Faribault Family Restaurant from 10:30 to 1:30, and it comes with a free lunch. So I'll link that up when I send out the follow-up email information about that meeting. So if you could share that with any women farmers or landowners, we would love to invite them to this luncheon. So any questions out there?